they could have landed safely. The order was given. The option was clear: to turn away, to seek the neutral sanctuary of a Swiss field, or to simply jettison their deadly cargo and limp back to the ragged edge of Allied lines. It would have been the rational choice, the human choice. But on the 1st of March, 1945, deep in the heart of the Third Reich's remaining war machine, the 10 men of a single B-24J Liberator faced a different calculus, one born of duty, of vengeance, and of a grim understanding that some targets demanded a price paid in full. This is not merely a story of a bombing run. It is the story of the moment a crew transformed their failing aircraft into the final, most devastating bomb of all. This is the story of the wrath of the liberators, and the day a burning bomber flew itself into history. The spring of 1945. The Allied armies are closing a vice on Nazi Germany from the east and the west. Yet, the German war industry, though battered and dispersed, continues to function. Key synthetic oil refineries and tank assembly plants, often hidden in forested areas or nestled near towns, remain high-value targets for the Allied strategic bombing campaign. Based out of the foggy plains of East Anglia, England, the heavy bombers of the United States 8th Air Force continue their relentless pounding. Among them flies the 389th Bombardment Group, the Sky Scorpions, stationed at Hethel, their weapon of choice. The rugged, twin-tailed B-24 Liberator, the Flying Boxcar, an aircraft known for its long range and heavy payload, but also for its unforgiving flight characteristics when damaged. Our story focuses on one particular aircraft and its crew, B-24J-85CO Liberator, serial number 44 to 44,125, piloted by First Lieutenant Robert Bo MacDonald. His co-pilot, Second Lieutenant John Jock Duffy, a seasoned crew. They had faced the horrors of the flak-filled German skies before. They had seen friends fail to return from missions to Schweinfurt, Berlin, and the dreaded oil targets at Merseburg. By March 1945, these men were not rookies. They were veterans living on borrowed time, each mission a statistical gamble against the lethal German air defenses that, though weakened, remained intensely dangerous around priority targets. The mission roster for March first listed a familiar and heavily defended objective: the Deutsche Industrie Work Tank Assembly Plant in the city of Ingolstadt, Bavaria. This facility was churning out crucial components for the Panther and Jagdpanzer IV tanks, weapons still inflicting heavy casualties on Allied ground forces. The order was clear: destroy it. The unspoken understanding was clearer still: it would be defended to the last shell. The morning of March 1st dawned cold and clear over Hethel. A maximum effort was declared. For the aircrews, this phrase carried a specific weight. Every serviceable aircraft would fly. The briefing room was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. The intelligence officers pulled back the curtain on the map, the red yarn stretching deep into southern Germany. Murmurs rippled through the room. Ingolstadt. They knew it, heavily defended by a concentrated belt of 88 millimeters and 128 millimeters Flak batteries strategically placed around the plant. and on the approaches to the city. The Luftwaffe might be a spent force, but the ground-based gunners were not. They would have to fly a long, straight, and predictable bomb run through a literal box of steel and high explosives. At approximately 9 hours, the four Wright R2600 twin Cyclone engines of aircraft 44 to 44,125 coughed to life, the deep-throated roar joining a symphony of hundreds of others across the field. Lieutenant MacDonald and his crew went through their meticulous pre-flight checks. The bomber, loaded with a full complement of 50 caliber ammunition and 10 500-pound general-purpose bombs in its belly, was heavy, sluggish on the taxi. One by one, the liberators of the 389th lumbered into the air, forming up into the vast, stacked combat boxes designed to maximize defensive firepower. The formation climbed through the cold English air, crossing the Channel, and then the now familiar landscape of occupied Europe. The patches of snow and dormant fields a blur 20,000 feet below. The flight inland was deceptively quiet. The feared German interceptor attacks of 1943 and 1944 were now rare, but the tension aboard the Liberator was palpable. Each man was sealed in his own tiny world of noise and vibration. The pilots scanning the endless sky, the bombardier and navigator in the plexiglass nose, the gunners in their blisters and turrets, swiveling slowly, searching for the first telltale black puffs of flak. The interior of the B-24 was a labyrinth of equipment, oxygen lines, and ammunition belts, the air smelling of sweat, cordite, and cold metal. As the formation crossed into the airspace north of the target area, the first tentative bursts of flak appeared, distant, inaccurate, ranging shots. The German radar had found them. The lead aircraft of the group began the critical initial point turn, aligning the entire formation for the bomb run. Now, there would be no evasive action. They had to fly straight and level for what would feel like an eternity, perhaps 10 minutes, to allow the Norden bomb sight in the lead aircraft to compute the trajectory. For the crews, it was the worst part of any mission, becoming a sitting duck. IP in sight, starting the run. The calm voice of the lead bombardier over the VHF radio was the signal. The formation steadied. And then, the sky around them erupted. It was not just flak. It was a solid wall of explosions. The German gunners had their altitude and speed perfectly calculated. The air became a hellish landscape of black, oily smoke and lethal red-hot steel fragments. Aircraft shuddered, a shrapnel ripped through aluminum skin, plexiglass, and flesh. The sound was a continuous, deafening crump, 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 each concussion violently shaking the 30-ton bomber. Inside 44 to 44,125, the world narrowed to the chaos outside their windows. Left waist gunner to pilot, flak at 6 o'clock level. Tail gunner, heavy concentration at 9 o'clock high. The reports were steady, strained. Then, the first hit, a violent, wrenching impact shook the entire airframe. A near miss by an 88mm shell had sent a chunk of shrapnel slicing into the number 3 engine. Oil instantly coated the wing, a dark, spreading stain. The engine began to run ragged. its rhythmic power dissolving into a frightening shudder. Lieutenant MacDonald and co-pilot Duffy fought the controls, feathering the prop to reduce drag and fire risk. The aircraft lost speed and began to lag in the formation, becoming more vulnerable. The bomb run continued, the aiming point still minutes away. The bombardier, hunched over his sight, tried to block out the chaos, his world reduced to the crosshairs drifting over the approaching sprawl of the tank factory. A second hit, more devastating. This shell burst directly beneath the aircraft's belly. Shrapnel tore up through the fuselage, severing control cables, wounding the radio operator, and, critically, starting a fire in the bomb bay. Warning lights illuminated the cockpit. The acrid smell of smoke and electrical fire seeped into the flight deck. The intercom crackled with reports of fire near the waist, of wounded men. The Liberator was now critically wounded, trailing smoke and flame, dropping further from the protective safety of the formation's combined firepower. For the German gunners below, it was a spotlighted target. In the cockpit, MacDonald and Duffy were engaged in a desperate struggle for survival. The aircraft was losing altitude. The fire in the bomb bay threatened to cook off their 500-pound bombs, which would vaporize them in an instant. The standard drilled into them procedure was clear. Jettison the bombs to reduce weight and eliminate the imminent explosion risk. Then turn for home or seek a neutral or friendly territory for a crash landing. The bombardier, awaiting the signal from the lead ship, knew they were moments from the bombs away call, that their aircraft was dying around them. Then, the third hit. This one was catastrophic. A 128mm shell exploded just off the right wing, shredding the number 4 engine and igniting the fuel tank within. A sheet of flame engulfed the right wing, streaming back past the tail. The bomber yawed violently to the right. The controls were heavy, unresponsive. The roar of the fire mixed with the scream of the wind through damaged structures. The inside of the aircraft became an oven. The intercom was a cacophony of shouts, reports of spreading fire, and the cries of wounded crewmen. The top turret gunner, trapped by flames, was trying to fight his way out. The lead aircraft dropped its bombs. The signal, "bombs away," crackled over the radio. The formation began its post-drop turn, a slow, banking maneuver to exit the target area and rally for the return flight. For MacDonald's crew, the moment of decision had arrived. They had not dropped their bombs. Their Norden was damaged. Their aircraft was a flying inferno, and they were now alone, stricken bird in a sky still filled with flak. The option to save themselves was tangible, urgent. They could salvo their bombs harmlessly into the countryside, put the nose down to gain speed, and maybe, just maybe, make it to the Swiss border 60 miles to the southwest. Or they could attempt a crash landing in a German field where capture, or worse, from a hostile populace, awaited. The lives of his crew weighed upon Lieutenant MacDonald. To continue was, by any logical measure, a death sentence. But through the smoke and flame, through the buckling airframe, MacDonald and his bombardier could still see the target. The Deutsche Industry work plant was directly below them, partially obscured by the smoke of the first bomb strikes, but clearly still operational, still intact. Other bombs had hit the periphery, but the heart of the complex, the main assembly halls, remained. Their 10 500-pound bombs, still nestled in the burning bay, were the last, best chance to destroy it. To turn away now would be to let their wounds, their sacrifice, be for nothing. It would mean another month of tank production, another month of those Panthers facing American GIs and British tankers on the ground. In that searing moment, logic was burned away by a hotter fire. The resolve to complete the mission at all costs. MacDonald's voice, strained but clear, came over the intercom. Not an order, but a statement of grim intent. We're going in. We're not leaving this target standing. There was no debate. The crew understood. The wounded radio operator, perhaps sensing the finality, tapped out one last, terse message to the group. Target in sight. On fire. Going in. The co-pilot, Duffy, locked his hands on the yoke, helping MacDonald fight the failing controls. The navigator began calling out altitude and drift corrections to the bombardier, who now had no sophisticated sight, only his eyes and his instinct. The burning B-24, now a deliberate weapon, ceased its aimless drift and steadied. It turned not away, but into a final, lethal approach. It was no longer a bomber attempting to survive a run. It was a projectile being aimed. The German gunners, seeing this mortally wounded beast not fleeing, but descending purposefully towards its objective, redoubled their fire. Flak bursts converged on it, but the very unpredictability of its damaged flight path made it a harder target. It was descending through its own funeral pyre. Inside, the conditions were apocalyptic. The heat was unbearable. Ammunition for the 50 calibers began to cook off in the waist, adding the sporadic zip of random bullets to the din. Oxygen masks hung useless as the interior was now at ambient air pressure, filled with smoke. Men choked, shouted, held on to whatever they could. The pilots, their faces glistening with sweat and soot, their oxygen masks discarded, squinted through the cracked and blackened windshield. The sprawling factory complex filled their view, growing larger, more detailed with every second of their controlled descent. They were not crash landing. They were aiming at an altitude of barely 4,000 feet. The bombardier, his hand on the manual release, made his final calculation. The lead assembly hall was directly in their path. With a shout that was lost in the roar, he toggled the release. The 10 bombs fell away in sequence, but the aircraft did not pull up. It could not. Its control surfaces were gone. Its wings were melting from the inside. The Liberator, freed of its payload, but committed to its trajectory, continued its plunge. The bombs hit first, a walking line of explosions stitched directly across the center of the tank factory. Secondary explosions from fuel and munitions within the plant sending massive fireballs rolling into the sky. And then, a fraction of a second later, the B-24 itself, a mass of flaming fuel, metal, and the remains of its 10 crewmen, followed its bombs into the cataclysm. It struck the plant at an angle, its remaining bombs in the forward bay detonating on impact. And then, a fraction of a second later, the B-24 itself, a mass of flaming fuel, metal, and the remains of its 10 crewmen, followed its bombs into the cataclysm. It struck the plant at an angle, its remaining bombs in the forward bay detonating on impact. The resulting explosion was titanic, a final, defiant statement that merged with the detonation of the target itself. Witnesses and other bombers, now miles away, but looking back, saw not just a plane crash, but a deliberate impact that seemed to trigger the total destruction of the facility. A pillar of smoke and debris rose thousands of feet into the clear March sky. A funeral pyre and a mission accomplished signal in one. The immediate aftermath was silence on the radio channel for aircraft 44 to 44,125. The rest of the 389th Bomb Group returned to Hethel, their missions successful, but with a heavy toll and the lingering image of one crew's ultimate sacrifice burned into their memories. Post-strike reconnaissance photography later that week confirmed what many had suspected. The Ingolstadt tank assembly plant had been utterly destroyed. The central assembly halls were leveled, the machine shops pulverized. Production ceased completely and never resumed in any meaningful way before the war's end. Just 9 weeks later, the raid had achieved a strategic objective, but at a profound personal cost. All 10 men aboard B-24J-44 to 44,125 were killed instantly in the impact and explosion. They were First Lieutenant Robert H. MacDonald, pilot; Second Lieutenant John A. Duffy, co-pilot; Second Lieutenant Edward J. O'Brien, navigator; Second Lieutenant John W. Huston, bombardier; T/Sergeant Donald R. Klink, engineer/top turret gunner; T/Sergeant Roy H. Johnson, radio operator; S/Sergeant John R. Fisher, ball turret gunner; S/Sergeant Robert C. Jones, left waist gunner; S/Sergeant William F. Krantz, right waist gunner; and S/Sergeant Stanley J. Richlitsky, tail gunner. Their remains were initially buried by the Germans in a local cemetery before being reinterred after the war. The crew's action was not immediately heralded in press headlines. The war was in its final, chaotic months, and such acts of sacrifice, while extraordinary, were not uncommon in the brutal air war over Europe. However, within the ranks of the 8th Air Force and later, in historical analysis, their mission took on a legendary status. They had been presented with a clear chance to save themselves, to land safely, as the title suggests, and had consciously, deliberately chosen otherwise. They transformed their aircraft from a delivery vehicle into a direct fire weapon, ensuring the destruction of a target that was fueling the Nazi war machine until its final gasp. For this, the entire crew was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the United States' second highest award for valor, with special citations noting their conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. Their story stands as one of the most stark examples of the at all costs ethos that defined the most critical missions of the strategic bombing campaign. A sobering reminder that the price of victory was measured not just in industrial output and territory gained, but in the ultimate decisions of ordinary men in an extraordinary hell. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to WWII-Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.